Hey everyone, it's Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karan from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us, a journey of self-discovery through a shared love of film. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite movies. We hope these movies and topics are fun and revelatory to you, just like the way they've been to us. So with that, what's our episode today, Alex?
Listeners, our episode today, this episode, we are going to the dogs, literally. So this episode is movies that shaped our love of dogs. And it was just National Pet Day recently, April 11th. So we thought this would be the time to honor our favorite pets, which are dogs. So both of us are dog lovers, and I am a current also dog owner. So we thought, movies, there's a lot of dogs in movies, animals in movies. And I think, we'll talk through about how those movies shaped our experiences as dog lovers, as dog owners. But maybe we can start with just a very brief background of our history with dogs. So Karan, yes, I know you had a dog. Maybe you can talk to our listeners a little bit about your dog.
I know. Yes. Makes me emotional just even thinking about it. But we had a golden lab named Bruno when I was in undergrad. And we'll talk more about this when we go over our list. But my mom grew up as a dog person. She had dogs all along. My dad, not so much. So it took us a long time to convince our dad to actually get us a dog. And we finally got one. And of course, it was amazing. But he left us way too soon, which was pretty hard and left a big hole in our hearts. And of course, now we think of him very fondly. But that's my story. What about you?
Cool. Bruno. So we'll dedicate this episode to Bruno along with all of our dogs.
But we don't talk about Bruno.
Oh, I was going to make that joke. Yeah. I was going to make that joke. I'd also always wanted a dog growing up, as maybe, most kids do. We got our first dog when I was like 9, but we only had him for a week because he had some like behavioral issues. So then he got taken away, which is a story more for my therapist in this podcast in terms of how that impacted me. It was not easy. But then we got our, I guess, technically second dog named Snowy, who was the dog I had growing up. She was a Wheaten Terrier. So I got her when I was 10. So she lived a good life. She passed away, or she was put down when I was 25. So I was not around at the time. So she was with me all through then, grade school, junior high school, went off to college, would come back and visit her. And then passed away. And then currently I own a dog named Oscar, who's a mutt. He's a mini Schnauzer and Yorkie mix that adopted him when he was around 1. So now he's about 8. So past dog owner, current dog owner. I just love dogs. I've always loved dogs. They make great pets, and they're just great creatures.
They are amazing. And Oscar is the best. I can testify to that.
And he's got a lot of great cousins too. My parents got another dog later in life, and my sister just got a dog about 2 years ago. So Oscar's got a lot of cousins. So I'm always surrounded by dogs, and it's something that is really, it's an enjoyable part of life. I feel like having a pet and being around dogs. Maybe with that, why don't we start off with your list then, Karan, about the first movie from your past that has shaped your love of dogs.
All right. So the first one I have here is a movie called 101 Dalmatians. This is the 1961 version, the animated version, directed by Wolfgang Reiterman, Hamilton Lusk, and Clyde Geronimi, with voices from Rod Taylor, Betty Lou Gerson, and J. Pat O'Malley. And the quick logline is, when a litter of Dalmatian puppies are abducted by the minions of Cruella de Vil, the owners must find them before she uses them for a diabolical fashion statement. So I put this movie on my list. First of all, a little bit of history. I got a VHS tape of this movie from my aunt, who's at that time, well, because she's no longer with us, but she married a Swiss and was living in Zurich for a long, long time. And she was visiting once, and she brought a German VHS tape of this movie. So for the longest time, I'd actually never even seen the English version. It had no subtitles, but me and my sister would just watch the German version.
So is that 101 German Shepherds then, where like the dogs recast as German dogs?
No.
I actually would love to hear, not to interrupt your story here, but I'd love to hear that, like the voices, like the German voices on like Pongo, and like that'd be really cool. But
I know, exactly.
very special.
Yeah. Pretty amazing. I wish I could find, I'm sure we could find that version now, but yeah, it made a big impact from, very, very early on. And there's something of course, the dog was super adorable, super cute, but I think there's something about the animation style of this movie, which I'll talk about a little bit later, that made a big impact on me right from the get-go. But zooming out, I think why I put this movie on my list from a thematic standpoint was, to me, this movie is about the unconditional love that dogs give you and can often even save you. And of course, this theme is going to be touched in all of our movies in some way or the other. But to me, this is the signature theme of this movie. But going back to watching this as a kid, there's some like visceral moments, which as I was making my list, I just was taken by how many of such moments have stayed with me, as an adult. But Lucky the puppy not making it, but then making it, Cruella mad driving, like these are indelible images from childhood that I can never shake off. But watching it again in preparation of this list, I don't know, I was just so struck by how beautiful the animation is, hand drawn, how quiet the movie is. And it's sort of interesting to compare this with all the versions of Cruella and this movie itself, which are quite manic and loud, versus this movie just feels so quiet, and you're in the breadth of the character and the story, and you're transported back to London. And when you do that, every single little moment, every single expression on the dog's face, of the dog's going to make it or not, the puppies have been kidnapped, and all these different emotions are so heightened, I thought, because of the way the movie is staged. But yeah, I think the movie is just so adorable. The animation is so great. Me and my sister, we had like a little stuffed animal dog. We named him Pongo. It was a Dalmatian puppy. So, and this is, like I said, we didn't have a dog for the longest time. So I think this movie in many ways for me was a little bit living vicariously through the movie, and just imagining that if we had, a dog, or maybe a bunch of dogs just showed up somehow, and just the way the movie ends, where they're like, 101 dogs in their bedroom. And I still remember my dad would just like walk out of the room when that scene would come. It's like, this could never happen. Like 101, can you imagine so many dogs in one house? This would be a nightmare. And we would be like, sounds pretty great, actually.
Yeah, it's like your dream, his nightmare, basically.
Well, and now I would say my nightmare too, actually. Because watching it again, I was like, oh, hell no. I mean, what's going to happen? This is ridiculous. So yeah, I think it's a sweet movie, and has sort of lived with me through all this time. The one kind of deeper thing that I was thinking about, and I haven't fully formed my thought on this one, but in many ways, to me, Cruella and her ambitions, if you were to think about it in a different way, perhaps represents how some people can almost be like selfishly possessive about dogs in a way that they almost sort of own them, and they are off them, if you will, as opposed to, making a family with them where they are individual people who are part of your life and your family. And maybe that's what the movie is trying to say, that there are different kinds of people who have different associations and quote unquote love and fascination with these beautiful animals. And it sort of shows you what that can do. Because, this is true in human relationships too, that the line between love that's constructive and destructive is pretty thin. If you kind of go to the other side, things sort of get out of hand. And maybe that's what this movie is really getting at. So yeah, that's my number 3, 101 Dalmatians.
Nice. Yeah, definitely a true Disney classic. So I had seen this film as a kid a lot of times on Disney Channel and on VHS tape. It was never one of my favorite Disney films. And actually, I haven't probably seen it in 30 years. And it was
Same
actually
here.
very interesting rewatching it because you said, memories that you had of this movie that stuck with you forever. For me, it was more like buried memories. Like I'd watch it and be like, oh my God, I remember this. Like it was like a fever dream of like waking up from and be like, oh my God, yeah, of course. Like the moment you called out, for sure. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. It was like I was remembering the movie as I was watching it, which is kind of an interesting experience. And it's still a quiet film, like you said. It's kind of simple, but a simple story done very well.
Right.
I like how the dogs are the main characters. Like you start in on the film and it's narration. You're thinking, oh, this is like the owner of the dog, and then you get to meet the dogs. Like, no, that's like Pongo's narration. Right. And the entire movie is mainly through their point of view and their world. And that was something that was always so cool as a kid too, that like you're in with the pack of like these dogs, and like you get to know what they do, and they're the ones with the personalities, and the humans are more like the pets. I think they even call them their pets.
They even call them pets.
That's right, they do.
For a minute, I was sort of watching this. I was like, wait, who is Roger? Is that the man or the dog?
yeah. So I thought that was really cool. And like you said, Cruella's like just the animation on that character is so incredible. Definitely an incredible villain, and no wonder she is still like stands out, even in a way like above this film. In the remake that they made with Glenn Close, it was more around definitely Cruella, and then she got her own movie recently. It's like she is so important in like the Disney villain, pantheon. And it's definitely, you go back to this film and you can see that. But it's not just her. I mean, I do think the rest of the movie, like my favorite character, ironically enough, in a movie with 101 Dalmatians was a cat. The cat was freaking hilarious. That was like helping them in the in like the town, in the house to like rescue all the puppies. Cat was
sergeant.
Great. Yeah. So funny. So I like that dynamic. You interesting too, you bring up the animation style, because actually, like for me, it was the reason that I just never go back to this film very much. I don't like, this is like the beginning of a period in Disney animation, which I'm a huge fan of Disney animation, where they use this Xerox process, where they kind of skipped the inking phase and would Xerox the pencils to then create the animation, and they kind of got rid of the inking process. It was a cheaper process. Sleeping Beauty had just come out before this movie, which is my favorite Disney film, but a giant bomb for the studio and almost brought them under. So they had to like cut costs. And this movie was a big hit and kind of saved Disney animation. But through that style, which then was continued on in the 60s and the 70s, and really not until the Disney Renaissance, so they kind of get rid of it. I was kind of turned off by all of those films because of that style. Just never really landed much with me. But yeah, it was really fun to rewatch this. Like I said, just very enjoyable movie. In the end too, I was kind of like, wow, this is so cool. But I was like, wait a second, like 101 dogs, like what are they really going to do? But you don't really think about that as a kid. It's more just like a cool thing. So definitely this, a movie that it is a Disney classic, and it, watching it again just proves that. If folks haven't seen it, definitely recommend it.
Totally. And actually on the animation point, I didn't mention this. When I watched it, my memory of watching this this movie as a child was, the animation is kind of very dark. But maybe the version that I watch now is just like restored or recolored or what have you, but it felt a lot brighter.
Well, the German version might have been more like German expressionist or something. Possible. Was it, very
possible. It's like 101 Dalmatiner.
Yeah. Did you know German at all?
Little bit.
Okay. So it wasn't like you're watching a movie where you have no idea what's going on, but that's kind of fun actually, to watch a movie about animals where you actually can't understand them. So it is more like real life in a sense. Like dogs do communicate to each other in different ways. I mean, it's not as vocal, but humans don't know what they're doing. No. So it's sort of, you got to experience this movie as if you were a human watching a bunch of dogs. You're like, I don't know what's going on, but I love that dog. That's cool.
Yeah, and plus, it's great storytelling. So even if you don't understand the words, you follow along. That's just true. How most Disney movies, if well done, are. But yeah, it's funny you say this, because Sleeping Beauty is just so incredible, and then the more modern version starting from the 80s and such are also so bright, and this interesting kind of more dull. I didn't know about the inking process part that you talked about, but now that you say it, it's quite visible. But I think it suits this movie. Its tone. I need to watch other movies from this era to kind of have a full perspective on it. But this movie sort of has a bit of a melancholic, macabre sort of undertone to it. I always remember this from a childhood time too, that this movie was kind of dark. I wasn't always just putting this VHS tape in to be in a happy, joyous mood. It had to be a different kind of a headspace to watch this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is true. I don't really know what the vibe is, but it is like there is a bit of a darker or somber vibe. I mean, maybe it's just the plot of a woman who wants to kill puppies and make a coat. I mean, that's pretty dark anyway, but yeah, that's a good point.
There's that. There's also sort of loneliness, I think, in the movie, especially as the movie starts. Like Roger's apartment is just like basically a homeless, not, I shouldn't say homeless, but because he has a home, right. But like a hoarder's apartment, basically. Yeah. It's like
he's
pretty
a mess.
Bad. Anyway, so what's your number 3?
Great. So it's also I think this was a Disney movie as well, but live action. White Fang from 1991. So this is directed by Randall Kleiser. Ethan Hawke starred in it, along with Jed, who played the dog. The dog actually was also in The Thing. He played so he was a pretty famous dog actor of the time. The IMDb plot summary is Jack London's classic adventure story about the friendship developed between a Yukon gold hunter and a mixed dog wolf he rescues from the hands of a man who mistreats him. Now, this is a film for me that really helped, similar to what you were talking about with 101 Dalmatians, helped me really identify with the dog and really give the dog as much of an importance in this film as the human characters did. The dog isn't just a pet or an extension of something the humans are trying to do. The dog has agency. The dog has his own personality and thrust to the plot. He's just as much of a main character. And it really helped me realize that, we're all animals. Humans are animals, dogs are animals. And that we're all kind of on that same level. It also was a movie, plot summary mentioned, based on a Jack London story, which this movie actually inspired me as a young kid when I saw this to read a lot of Jack London. And a lot of his stories are with the dogs as the center character, White Fang, which this movie takes a lot of liberties with, nothing like the book. The dog is more of the main character in the book. And then Call the Wild, and all this about what, the dog is given an inner monologue. The dog's thinking about how they relate to society that is like human society versus animal society. And it's a lot about their place just in the ecosystem and in the world. And I think this movie, at least the dog scenes, do a very good job of that. There's the beginning of the movie, there are no humans in it. When you see White Fang as a puppy, it's shot sort of like a nature documentary where the dogs exist on their own. There are no humans there. The dogs are just living and surviving. They're not seen as pets or seen as any relation to humans. They exist completely separate, much like dogs did, thousands of years ago when they were before, we kind of became man's best friend. So I really kind of identified this. I mean, I think identified with that. And then the human comes into it too. And there's a lot of, interactions between Ethan Hawke's character and White Fang. White Fang, though, again, is not, I don't really think this movie treats him as a pet to Ethan Hawke. Mm-hmm. He's just they're more like co-leads. White Fang's got his own story arc, and so did Ethan Hawke. And it's interesting, again, the Ethan Hawke character is not in the book. It's interesting what they do with this character too, where it's like Ethan Hawke is coming from civilization into the wild, and in the end, he chooses to stay in the wild, and this is what he likes, and this is how he feels at home. And White Fang is coming from the wild into then human civilization, and in the end, he realizes he wants to stay with Ethan Hawke and wants to stay in civilization as opposed to go back into the Yukon. I think I just always like that parallel there, and really. To me, like, again, the big takeaway, and something that really did leave an impression on me when I saw this as a kid in the theater and then a couple times on TV and VHS, was the fact that, the animals are human too, in a way. We have this idea now of, I don't know if you've heard of like the Bechdel test, which is something for female characters where they're female characters in a film. And the test is, do they talk amongst themselves and talk about things that are not men? And I think what this movie does so well, it's like a Bechdel test for dogs in a way. Like White Fang's, a lot of his adventures, a lot of what happens to him really has nothing to do with humans. He has his own agency. And that is really how I looked at dogs. When I got my dog growing up and I have my dog now, I really don't feel like they're pets. You were talking about it earlier with 101 Dalmatians too. Like they're part of, of the family, and they're really, we're just different animals. We coexist on the same level. Yeah, upon rewatch, I mean, the movie is not great. I wouldn't say this is a great movie or even adaptation of White Fang. I mean, when I went off and read the book as a kid, I'm like, wow, this book is so much better than that movie. But this movie, again, did leave an impression on me. And I did get a lot of those same themes after watching this, which I had not seen in 30 years. This film. And, again, I don't think it really holds up as a film, but these themes still do come across. And it's something that really impacted me a lot as a kid. And then also now just with animals in general, but specifically dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, I never watched this movie before. I think I'd heard of it. So it was good to kind of watch this movie. I actually quite enjoyed it. Maybe I went in with tempered expectations and, the movie drags and such in various places, but it's actually made quite beautifully in many ways. Like the scale of the movie, you are transported to this beautiful place, Alaska and what have you. It's shot pretty well. And
it actually is.
Scenes are quite compelling. So I thought it was actually quite good in many ways. But yeah, the piece that you talked about really struck me as well, that dogs have their own agency in this movie. And you really see kind of the challenges that come up with these two beings coming together. There's a lot of drama that happens where wolves are attacking humans and then humans are attacking them and people are getting shot and killed and wounded and what have you. There's like a lot of tension that happens. So you kind of, by the end of the movie, this relationship between these two equals feels very earned to me, as opposed to just man coming in and saying, oh, I'm going to buy you from the shop and you're going to be now my pet. No, it's not that. This relationship is really earned. And I can only imagine how much better and vivid the book might have been, the way you're describing it. So maybe I'll read this book at some point. And it was fun to watch Ethan Hawke young, in that time frame. He's just so great, and you can still see all his mannerisms and cheekiness and all of it very, very apparent at that young age as well. So it was fun to see that.
Yeah, it was now I'm bringing an Ethan Hawke movie in here. I feel like you've done that a couple times in the podcast. Now, now this is mine. But I think he did a great job. And again, that dog actor, I think, is fantastic as well. And I also thought it was interesting in the beginning of the film when they had the no animals, or the big message before the movie starts, like all the animals are actors, nothing, no animals were harmed. No one was in harm's way, which it's nice to see because there's, a scene with when he fights like a bear. And I'm like, how is the bear actor doing this? How is the dog doing this? Like, this is just amazing. Definitely not I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Milo and Otis. Don't watch it. And for anyone at home, if you love that movie listening, do not go on the Wikipedia page and read about how this movie was made. This movie, though, I think is a response to that in terms of like everything is fine, animals are fine. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I mean, I think the strengths of this film, like you said, are just it's great cinematography, all natural locations in the Yukon, really does transport you to that time period. But still, I think it's kind of average to middling overall. But glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2 for you.
Number 2 for me is Beethoven from 1992, starring Charles Grodin, who passed recently, I believe. Yes. Bonnie Hunt, Dean Jones, directed by Brian Levant, written by John Hughes and Amy Holden Jones. And the quick logline is: a slobbering Saint Bernard becomes the center of attention for a loving family, but must contend with a dog-napping veterinarian and his henchmen. So I watched this movie pretty much when it came out. So I must have been kind of, early teens, I think, at that time. To me, this movie kind of mimics sort of my own life in many ways, like I said, where my dad was not really a dog person. He kind of came around, and once we had Bruno, he was the one who was taking him for walks. He was the one who was getting all his food and everything, and complaining but also loving him. And then once we had to say goodbye to Bruno, he was the one who was, we were all gutted, obviously, but so was him. So I think this movie was special when I watched it, because at that time it was just laughing at my dad saying that, oh my gosh, this is all happening, on screen.
Yeah.
So could we somehow get this dog? But as time has gone by, this movie has developed even more significance with me because of sort of how things turned out, because we did get a dog and my
Mm-hmm.
dad had this journey. But aside from that, I think this movie, it's to me is sort of 90s suburban joy bliss movie where every most things are happy, and the stakes are pretty low for the most part until they do become high towards the end of the movie.
Oh yeah.
But I don't know, I was thinking about rewatching this movie as to how sincere and earnest this movie is, and you couldn't make a movie like this now for whatever reason. Wherever we are at as a society and people, that something has to be edgy and something has to be that, which I'm for as well. But I think it really struck me as to how sweet this movie is, and maybe even corny at times, but it works. And maybe I'm biased because I have memories of this movie. I was,
Mm-hmm.
like you were saying, I'd not watched this movie in, I don't know, 25, 30 years, but I was surprised by how much I remembered scene by scene, looks and lines and music drops. I remembered everything. So it just tells you, literally movies shape lives. So yeah, it was just a joy revisiting this movie. But a couple of kind of standing out things for me. I
Mm-hmm.
think the dog montage, or Beethoven's montage of him growing up and all the ruckus he's causing and how the family's adjusting around him, and such. It's just so fun to watch, so beautifully shot from the dog's point of view. And to me, the other thing that stand out is that how Beethoven kind of owns the house and
Mm-hmm.
owns the town. He's like the mayor essentially. Walks around, obviously always eating at all times.
Right.
And then I love how the dog like gently understands every human's predicament, and is so perceptive and kind of gently pushes them to get higher confidence, or helps them in ways that just is so sweet to me. And I've had versions of that, Bruno, when if I was in pain or somebody was in a bad mood, he would do things like that. He would show up and bring a little toy, or just be really perceptive and sweet. Of course, this is a movie, so it's heightened, but
Right.
I think that really comes across like and that has to work, for you to kind of be at the edge of your seat when all the bad stuff is happening in the third act of the movie, where
Mm-hmm.
Not Bruno, sorry, Beethoven is being framed and might be put down, and this horrible vet and everything that's
Yeah.
happening with him. Oh my gosh, like for that to land on you, the previous half of the movie has to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really does. This movie forever has left like a slight doubt in my mind about vets, that what if they are terrible and they hurt my dog in some way and it's because of this movie. So yeah, I just think it's such a sweet movie, about a dog. And like you said, again, this is not a movie where this dog was kind of bought.
Right.
This dog magically appears. And
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing which me and my sister would talk about, that what if a dog just walked in somehow, and my mom and I, we would like laugh about that, and just imagine how fun life would be. And then it's a negotiation of this relationship, especially between the father character and the dog. Like, it's not
Mm-hmm.
all hunky-dory from the beginning, and it takes a bit to kind of form that bond, form that relationship. And it still tears me up at the end when the father is there at the vet's office and is convinced that he needs to be put down, and is
Yeah.
sort of holding him and crying, and it still gets me. And then the last thing I would say is that this movie could have been very simple and just very surface level, and in some ways it is, but I think there's a little bit of depth to it too that's happening, where the struggle between the dad wanting to be more successful in life,
Mm-hmm.
this debate about should the mother go back to the workforce, how what the challenges of success versus family, and what's at stake. And in this time in the 90s, how are couples and families negotiating the power dynamics between them. And there are gentle nods to that, which they didn't have to do all that, but I think that's what John Hughes does. His
Mm-hmm.
movies are, if you want to take them on the surface level, you can, and that'll be fun and happy and entertaining. But there's always some real life depth to it. And that's why this movie comes across as three-dimensional, even though it's a very simple story. And then, yeah, I was looking at the IMDb box office of this movie. We've been talking a lot about simple movies or movies of that, like they don't make him like this anymore.
Yeah.
This movie made like $150 million, something like that.
Huge hit. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my number two. Beethoven will always be in my heart, and my love for big giant dogs continues.
Yeah, this I had a very similar reaction to you when so I should say, like, I watched this as a kid, saw it in the theater at least once, maybe twice, and definitely like on VHS, when it came out, which I think was 91, you said. So I was like 10 or so when this movie came out. But I hadn't seen it in, 30 years, right? And rewatching it, the same reaction as you, like literally every scene I remember. I was like, how do I remember Beethoven like this? Like, I hadn't seen the movie in this long, and I must have watched it so many times that it had such an indelible impression on me. So that was definitely surprising. It was also interesting too, like watching this movie as an adult now, and as someone who has been a dog owner too, that the movie is basically about Charles Grodin and the dog. Like the family are not really much of a thing. Like they wrap up the storylines of like, oh, the daughter wants to date a girl, or not a girl, a guy, and Beethoven helps him do that. It's like in the first 20 minutes, like all the kids' storylines are wrapped up. The wife is literally like a non-entity in the film. It's really about Grodin. And as a kid, I love Charles Grodin as a kid and thought he was funny, but I guess you sort of identify with the kids because you're a kid, and you sort of don't realize this entire movie is basically a Charles Grodin vehicle along with a dog. And it's really about, he's the one who has the story arc of, oh, this dog's so annoying. He's, I have to take care of it. And then at the end, he does love the dog. In that scene that you mentioned, which is very sad, when he thinks he has to put Beethoven down and he's saying goodbye to him and sort of saying, look, like, I know we had some hard times there, but I really did love you this whole time. And, this is really hard for me to do, but I have to do it, to protect my family, which is what, because he thought the dog was crazy. And that's why, there was a situation where we put the dog down. And I think he really carries the movie for sure, like Grodin does. And it's interesting too, like now as a dog owner, just seeing like how poorly behaved this dog was and how they had no idea of how to train it, how to you cannot have a dog act like this. Like I was like, how can they, like, I get it's like funny and like, a comedy, obviously, so the dog has to be misbehaved, but it's like, you shouldn't have your dog go through the garbage or do this or do this. It's like,
why is the dog in the bedroom? Why is the dog, all these places?
Right.
It's
but as
fault, not the dog's fault.
No, not at all the dog's fault. No, the dog doesn't know any better. The dog needs to have those boundaries set. And it's dog training is, as an owner now, is incredibly important. Discipline. They need a pack leader. They need someone to set guidelines and boundaries, and they want to be trained and want to be told, don't do that, do this instead. And definitely, not anything you ever think about as a kid, but I'm like, wow, this movie should never be used as like a guide to how to have a dog. And then it's interesting you mentioned that too about the vet, because I, again, had forgotten the plot of this movie. But then once I started watching it, I remember that. And I looked it up actually on Wikipedia afterwards that, the Veterinary Association of America, because spoiler alert, the vet is the villain of the film. And he kidnaps dogs and basically tortures them for medical experiments. The American Vet Association was very upset by this movie and protesting it because you're basically painting a negative opinion of vets. And it was funny when I was like, I never had, like, that impression was never left on me. So it's interesting that it did affect you in a way that is, even to this day, you have a little bit of skepticism about vets. And that actor does such an incredible job too of doing like everything, I'm a nice guy. And then actually like, I'm super evil. Like he's like going to shoot the plot of the movie is basically, he's going to shoot Beethoven in the head to test a new bullet and how like it, what it does to brain tissue. Like that is horrifying. And to put that in a kid's movie. And as a kid, it's like, you don't really necessarily even think about as, that didn't leave a scar and impression on me, but as an adult looking at that, I'm like, oh my God, like talk about, they would never put that in a movie today. I feel like that would be a studio note immediate. It's like, we can't have the villain like shooting the dog hero in the head. And that's like the climactic scene when they have to save like, whoa, like how did that even make it, in a movie in 91? But yeah, no, I do think this this movie did still is fun. I mean, it's very not like pejorative, but it's very silly and dumb. Like it's not, it's very straightforward, a lot of slapstick humor, but very funny. I think the movie still holds up. I saw the sequel in theaters, I remember. And then now there's like 4 or 5 direct video versions of it that I'd never seen those, but I remember liking the sequel too as a kid. I guess there's like a female Beethoven or something in that one, if I remember the poster
right.
correct.
Yeah. Maybe
they always have to bring in the female. Yeah. Enjoyable movie. I almost did put this one on my list, even though I haven't seen it in 30 years. I'm like, no, Beethoven, like that's the dog movie that I think of a lot. And then when I saw it in yours, I'm like, okay, that'll be like my, didn't make it. But it was fun to rewatch and just realize like how much I remember from this thing from my childhood. It was weird. Again, kind of like 101 Dalmatians, almost like a fever dream watching this. But fun.
I think we're going to have a lot of that with these movies.
Yeah, exactly.
I do want to say about the family, and I mean, to me, I think, yeah, you're right. They don't have an arc or anything, which, as you know, I don't care about those things that much anyway.
Right.
I know you do.
Yeah.
For me, I think that is very important because we as an audience will not fall in love with the dog, and we would not be rooting for anything if the dog and the rest of the family doesn't fall in love the way they do. Like we have to see what this dog does to this family, and we also have to see the father see that how much this dog means to everybody and what an important thing he's done for all of them. We have to see that. Otherwise, the movie just completely falls apart. So yeah, they might be, window dressing in some ways, but I think without that, the movie is nothing. Leaving aside, of course, the fun jokes and the fun slapstick fun part. But from a story standpoint, I think that's pretty important. And so is the case with the mother, because ultimately, yeah, she doesn't have much to do, but that one line that she gets where she's like, while you chasing your dream, your family is going down the drain or what have you, while he's interested in pursuing this whole thing with David Duchovny. I'm like, gosh, I'd forgotten that you were in this, but you are.
Yeah.
And you're horrible and super weaselly and, slimy. But that's important. I think that's an important tension point in the movie. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, though, again, I will give Grodin more credit than the screenplay. I think the screenplay does a disservice to the characters. And Grodin's part is not really well written, I think. If you look at it, like he though is bringing so much to that role, and his acting chops of playing this sort of like beleaguered dad who then reluctantly falls in love with this dog. I mean, that is the meat of the story. It's about him accepting a dog into his life and into his heart. And the script, I just don't think does a very good job of selling that. And if it wasn't Grodin, I just don't think this movie would be as successful as it ended up being. I think just his performance and what he brings to that part, which I don't think is that well written, is what makes the movie enjoyable. And again, I wouldn't have thought about that when as a kid, but like now watching, it's like, oh, the movie works because of Grodin. Like what he's bringing to this thing is like, that's the love that I buy. Like the kids, it's just sort of like, oh, cool, a dog, this is fun. And then again, I think the Bonnie Hunt is more of just playing the housewife. But Grodin, like you see the struggles that he's under, you see, and even that it is hard for him to have that tension point of like, oh my gosh, I have to take this dog and put him down. And the only thing that once he crosses the line of endangering his family, then he actually becomes that protective father. And that's the growth for him. Because I think he's disregarded his family, as Bonnie Hunt said, for his own career. And I think this moment where now his family is threatened by this outside force of the dog, or thinks is threatened, that's when he actually becomes a real dad for his family and does something incredibly hard that he doesn't even want to do, but for the good of the family. I think that is the big turning point for him when he makes that choice of like, no, the dog's got to go. I'm sorry. Like you can't like attack my family, or so he thinks. Again, Beethoven is innocent. He's a sweetie. But I think that's the moment where he becomes a real dad. And I think that's that arc that he sells so well. It just definitely recommend Beethoven for all those folks who haven't seen it. Though odd that they don't put a lot of Beethoven's music in this movie. I thought that was odd too. Even the score, which I remember, like that theme too. I was like, oh my God, the Beethoven theme. And I was thinking, like, was this a riff on any piece of Beethoven? I was like, no, total. Like, you'd think they would use a little bit of like Beethoven, especially considering the music's, in the public domain. Thought that was a little odd. As an adult looking back at it. But yeah, that score, I was like, oh my God, the Beethoven music. Like I haven't heard that in 30 years, but I know exactly what that's from.
So good,
It's a fun,
I mean,
it's a fun
they
film.
use it a little bit when he's being named, but that's
Right,
it.
right. Exactly. Yeah.
Which I'm glad actually, because I think it feels very purposeful, as opposed to just like putting Beethoven soundtrack all over the
Yeah.
place. It'll just, I don't know, it'll be odd and
Yeah. I just was expecting that for some reason now as an adult and a fan of Beethoven's music to be like, oh, there's going to be a lot of Beethoven in this. But yeah, anyway, it's a great film, really fun. I'm glad you put this on here, and fun to rewatch it.
Cool. All right, what's your next?
So my number 2 is Best in Show. Came out in 2000, directed by Christopher Guest, starring Fred Willard, Eugene Levy, Catherine O'Hara, Michael McKean, Christopher Guest himself, and a bunch of other folks from Christopher Guest's usual cast from his films. The plot summary is a behind-the-scenes look into the highly competitive and cutthroat world of dog shows through the eyes of a group of ruthless dog owners. So this is a film I saw in 2000 when it came out. I'm a huge Christopher Guest fan. So see all of his films. I saw this one opening weekend and really loved it. And I think what for me this does is really it's a movie about owning a dog and dog owners and how the dog can match the owner or be sort of like the parts of yourself, good or bad, get kind of heightened through your dog and through the love of your dog. So I had not owned a dog at this time when I saw this film. I mean, my family dog growing up was still alive. But, as a kid, it's very different having a dog in the family as a child where like the parents are taking care of it. You're not really the owner in the same way of actually having a dog, with like my dog now, Oscar. It's a different relationship that you have as a dog owner. What I think this movie does so well is to show each of these characters, these crazy characters who are taking each of their dogs to be shown in like a Westminster type dog show is the plot of the film there. And just seeing each of these crazy characters and how the dogs bring out different parts of their personalities, again, for better or for worse. There's a couple who is always fighting and very high strung. And there's a scene where the dog or they lose a dog toy, like a Busy Bee dog toy that they think the dog likes. And the dog, like, as you see the dog in the scene, like dog, he doesn't care. Like, it's like, whatever, the toy's got, but they are freaking out, screaming at each other, having to run around and try to find like where we need to find another bee toy because the dog really cares about this. The dog doesn't care about this at all. It's just it's like the dog is sort of this way for them to siphon the their negative relationship feelings that they have between each other, basically. And then Eugene Levy, whose dog wins the show at the end, is a very like kind of put upon, meek and kind of mild mannered guy whose wife, Catherine O'Hara, is, always kind of like embarrassing him and steamrolling over him. And when that dog wins in the end, I think it's giving him that confidence that he kind of needs and feels. And again, so it's like the dog is kind of helping give him a little bit of that. But also this movie is just incredibly funny. Jane Lynch and Fred Willard, especially Jane Lynch. I mean, this movie made her into a star. She's hilarious in this and has had a long career after, really, because of how she, performed so well in this movie. A lot of really funny scenes, but I think there's a lot of things where I remember thinking when I saw this, like, what kind of dog owner am I going to be whenever I do own a dog at some point, because I knew I'm going to want to have one. And I do feel that, your dog does match, the owners do match the dogs for better or for worse. And I think that's what this movie just exemplifies so well, beyond being like, I think Christopher Guest's funniest film and just a, really, really funny movie for the humans. It's not really about the dogs. It's like I said, it's a lot more about the owners, but it's a movie that I still think is very funny. Watch it every couple of years. It's really fun to rewatch for this podcast.
Yeah, no, I agree. This is, I think, Christopher Guest's best in my mind as well. I obviously not watched it earlier when probably you watched it, but watched it maybe the first time a few years ago, and then I watched it since a few more times, and hilarious, love it. And yeah, that is the big takeaway. I would just build on that and say that and you see this in real life too, that humans start looking like their dogs
Oh yeah.
after a point in time, which is just so hilarious to me, but so
Yeah.
true. And this is true in this movie as well at all levels, like emotionally, behaviorally as well in some ways, perhaps. So yeah, just absolutely love this movie. Heightened. I love the whole competition element as like another layer to it,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of takes it to a different place where how dog parents can get pretty competitive with their dogs,
For
right?
sure.
It doesn't have to be a dog show, but just even in real life, that my dog is the cutest, or my dog does this and is the best trained, or blah blah blah. So there's like this constant competition happening in real life, and so that's fun to see as well. And then not to mention, like you said, all the different weird characters that show up, and that's classic Christopher Guest, right? All these people, I'm always like, where have you plucked these people
Oh
from?
yeah.
They're just, but it's the same gang. I just love this whole idea in his movies of this company of actors,
Mm-hmm.
they know they're so comfortable with each other. They have their shorthand. It sort of feels like this, low budget, which it probably is, but, like a play like production where they all just gathered and Christopher Guest said that, okay, today you're going to be this.
Right.
And this person just like enters the body of this weird character and they are that person for their entire day. That's what the movie feels like. So I don't know. I just love imagining how fun would it have been to make something like this,
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I love this movie. It was great to see it on your list.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're talking about the dogs exemplifying the owners. It reminds me of the opening scenes of 101 Dalmatians, where Pongo's kind of looking out and you see like there's the bulldog and he kind of looks like them, the owner walking him. It's
exactly.
like they took that concept and now just made a movie about it. Where the dogs are just very like tertiary characters. Like they're not, it's really about the humans. And I even imagine like if dogs were to see this movie, they would get enjoyment out of it too, because I'm sure they make fun of how silly their owners are. Because like you said, you go to a dog park and there is a little bit of that, like, oh, like, are you a good dog owner? Like my dog's better than your dog. And I get the sense the dogs are just like, we don't care. Like we just want to play. Like you guys can do your little, like, I'm pompous sort of like who's the best. They're not into that. So they're almost like laughing at us too. I feel like this would be a movie that if a dog were to make a movie about humans, I think they would do this and just be mocking how silly we are. Because they don't care, as shown in this movie too. So often like the dogs are just sort of like, look, like, yeah, we'll go on the show. Like we don't care who wins. Like we'll just kind of sit here. And the humans are the ones freaking out all the time. So I think definitely agree with that.
Like a movie concept here, kind of best in show, but really it's about dog owners.
Yeah.
They are the ones competing in the show.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The dogs are reluctant judges.
Yeah.
They don't really care, but because it's a movie, we're going to make them care. So I think there's something here.
Oh, there's a big animated film. Get Illumination on that. It's like you flip it where like the dogs are the judges and they're, Okay, maybe we should cut this part out so someone doesn't steal this idea, because I think this could be the next big dog hit movie. But cool. Glad you enjoyed the rewatch on it.
Cool. So, okay, my number one is this movie called Marley and Me from 2008, starring Owen Wilson, Jennifer Aniston, directed by David Frankel. And the logline is a family learns important life lessons from their adorable but naughty and neurotic dog. This movie has like a special place in my heart only because, like I said, Bruno is a golden lab as well, and so is Marley. We watched this movie way before I think we got a dog, but it did overlap, I think, in our rewatches of when we finally had Bruno. But to me, kind of this movie, thematically as to why I put this on here is that it represents two things. One, dogs are a handful, of all the adorable things that we talk about them and how much we love them. It is a lot of work. And I think this movie really gets at that. But then the bigger theme to me is like we've been saying, dogs are true partners in your life. And I don't think I've seen a movie, I'm sure there's one out there, which kind of really shows the entire lifespan of Owen Wilson and the family's life, and what kind of a role Marley plays from his early days to when this family is all grown up and settled through moves and kids and relationships and jobs and everything. If there is one constant, it is this dog. And we've been talking a lot about, the hero and the relationship with that hero with the dog. This is really a love story, if you will, between Owen Wilson and Marley. Everybody else is sort of, in a way, tertiary to that. But I think the reason why this movie rings true is that there's more to it. You see the dog struggling and loving other people in their life as well. Like I love how Jennifer Aniston, who's like a new person entering this pack,
Mm-hmm.
how they show that relationship develop, where there's a lot of struggle, where she's trying to manage home and babies and everything and moves, and Marley is being Marley, being super annoying and demanding, but then there's also tenderness and love between them, and how Marley stands up and helps and supports while also being very annoying and very demanding and challenging. I think that's pretty beautiful. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call this like a great movie by any means, but I just think it has personal relevance to me for those reasons, because it just shows a full life. And some of the scenes that I still think of, when they're going on vacation and talking to the dog sitter and giving her things to do and take care of the dog, and what a train wreck that ends up being. I always think of that. I always think of the scene when they're at the dog trainer in the park somewhere, right, and how poorly that goes. Jen struggling with the baby, and Marley comforting her later. I always think of that. And then, of course, the final scenes of when they're sitting at the beach, Owen Wilson and Marley, and then finally when he has to be put down. I'm a total mess at that scene, even though I know what's coming. I've watched that scene a million times, but it's just so sad, because it's probably the truest relationship you can have in your life, in a way. And there's so much said in the unsaid between these two people that you really see that Owen Wilson has not shared those things even with Jen, and they have a great marriage and everything, but it's just a special bond that you form with your dog. So yeah, I do love this movie, and it has actually pretty good performances. Again, for there not being much on the page in terms of depth, I think Owen Wilson really brings a lot. Jennifer Aniston, that I'm sort of, okay on. I think she's actually pretty good in this movie, and kind of rounds off the family and has her own kind of struggle and arc that, like I was saying about earlier as well. So yeah, that's my number one, Marley and Me.
Yeah, so I had been I'd not seen this movie before the podcast. I'd actually been avoiding this movie, knowing that the dog dies in the end. It's like, I don't need to see that. This is going to be, hard. I don't want to see that. So this podcast finally had me watch Marley and Me. This movie, it was interesting. I have a lot of different reactions to it. The first thing was just, I was surprised, I guess, that the movie was so much about just Owen Wilson's life, and everyone, like, kind of like you were saying too, like a lot, even Jennifer Aniston, his kids, Marley. It's like they all seem to be outside of what the main thread was, just how his life was going. And it was interesting too how his life was sort of like, he didn't really seem to have a lot of control over it. It was Jennifer Aniston comes in, she's like, hey, I have a checklist of everything that I want to do. We get married at this age. We have kids at this age. Then we need the house. Then we need the job. And it's just like this checklist, which is he just sort of then kind of gets plugged into her plan and just sort of like then drifts through this life that I feel like he isn't really getting the most out of. Like, I don't get the sense from him that like he's making choices with like, oh, well, I have to grow up, so therefore, like, I'm going to do this because that's what it's like being an adult. He just seems like this listless. There's a word, like 30-year-old. Though again, he's 40 in the movie. At some point in the movie, I guess he turns 40. The timeline is a little hard to understand. But I guess it was like not identifying with him, but like tracking that character. Be like, dude, like, you shouldn't live life like a checklist. Like, what are you doing? Like, don't. Like, this is not a situation, you're going to regret this later on. So that was kind of just interesting. And Marley too, like, didn't also seem kind of like well, I'm getting a dog because at some point I'm going to have kids. So, and then his coworker tells him, you got to get the dog first. So he's like, okay, fine, I'll get the dog first. And then it's like the dog like showing up every once in a while in these other life moments of him. So it almost felt like his story where the dog was sort of peppered into it. And I never really got a sense much or like attachment to the dog throughout the film for some reason. I mean, maybe also the fact that like this is one note joke of like the dog is never trained. And like that's just consistently like just horribly behavior, which getting back to again, now as a dog owner, I'm like, this is not funny. Like this shouldn't, I get it's like kind of like you have the one scene where the dog is bad when he's a puppy, but like train your dog. Like he needs help. Like he shouldn't still be eating couches at age 5 as a dog. Like that is totally on you. Like you are failing as a dog owner. So that was just kind of weird. Like that never kind of went in. I feel like there was no Owen Wilson never kind of grows up either or like changes much, which I thought was sort of interesting. I thought it would be like, okay, well, the dog teaches him this lesson and now he's like a better father or a better husband. And I didn't really get that sense. So I thought that was just kind of interesting, like choice just as a film. I know that was based on, I think, was based on a book that was based on columns a newspaper writer was writing. It's a true story-ish. Like it's inspired by a real dog. But it does kind of feel like episodic in that way. And yeah, there were some scenes where it's like, okay, the dog is helping Jennifer Aniston when she has a miscarriage, and you see like kind of which dogs do, like kind of you referenced this earlier with you notice it when your dog and I have, and dogs that I've been around too, like they kind of sense emotions and they can come and help you in those moments. So I thought those scenes were definitely true to life and spoke to me. But yeah, like it just was interesting. It reminded me a lot of those like the dog I just felt was almost not really a character. He was kind of like a prop. Like there's a lot of sitcoms where it's like, oh, well, we got to get rid of that old chair that we've had for 30 years. And it's like all the memories that we had on this chair. And it's really sad, but like, okay, we got to throw it out because we're moving home. And like, there's a montage of all the moments of, with the old chair. And that's almost kind of what I felt with the dog in this movie. Like he wasn't, I don't know. Like I didn't feel that he was enough of a character that I was expecting, at least going into it. And, again, I did, the reason why I was avoiding this movie was the death scene. And I did, get emotional at that scene because it's like a dog's passing away. But I felt that the scene was like really manipulative and sort of like clunky in how they handled it. Like they start with the scene, not to get too much into like a really hard scene to talk about, but okay, there's a dog on the table and they zoom in on like the drugs as they're putting it in. And so I'm like, oh wow, they're like, this is going to be super real. Just the dog passing away with Owen Wilson there and this, but then they start cutting to other family members. And it's like Jennifer Aniston's sad, and the kids who never really had a relationship with the dog, they're all of a sudden like watching videos of the dog. And I'm like, none of this is earned. Like either you're going to do something very realistic and really like not sugarcoat at all and be like, look, this is sad part of life, which does capture the whole lifespan of a dog, like you said, which I thought was cool. It's like pick one, like either be very realistic or like incredibly schmaltzy and cutting to these kids, which had like, there were no big scenes of like the kids loving the dog. It was just sort of like more about Owen Wilson's relationship with the dog. So I don't know, like it didn't affect me as much emotionally as I thought. More, I think, due to like the filmmaking, I just didn't think was a landing for me on that scene. But yeah, actually, to sum it all up, actually, my thoughts on the film were this. In the credits, they have all, these scenes of like the dog running around. I'm like, oh, this is cool, like little home movies. All the Owen Wilson, Jennifer Aniston, so-and-so play the kid at age 5. I'm like, oh, wow. It's like, okay, so I wonder how many dogs they filmed in this movie, how many played Marley. Okay, where's the dog? Oh my God, the dogs weren't even listed in the credits. And then I went to IMDb. There were 3 dogs used, all uncredited. So I'm like, that to me sums up the movie. Like he isn't even given enough weight in the film to have a credit of the 3 dog actors who played Marley was not even mentioned. And that's how I felt the whole film treated just the dog in general. He was kind of like a non-entity to me. But
that's pretty sad that he was not listed.
He wasn't credited because I love seeing the name of the dog, and it's like they were lit, and the dog's the title. It's Marley and Me. It wasn't like Owen Wilson and the dog. And like, what a bad agent. Whoever those agents were of those 3 dogs, just like they were screwed out of that. But yeah, it's sort of like that to me was a summation of like, I just felt the dog, none of the stuff with the dog I felt was earned. And the dog just sort of felt like he was just a piece of piece of the house, or like not like a real animal, I guess. But yeah, that was my takeaway from it. But I'm glad I finally did see it, because I know there's a movie everyone talks about as like big dog movie, and like obviously the scene where the dog passes away, which is not something that you normally get in a movie. They usually kind of either don't show that or don't go through the entire life arc of the dog, which I did think was cool as a concept, but I just didn't think the dog had enough, like agency in his own film.
Yeah. I can see that take. But I don't know, like to me, I guess those are interesting choices for sure, of like they're not being, the lead actor not being in control of their life and what have you. But, there are people like this. There are people
yeah, for sure.
Life just sort of passes by and things happen. And I think that is why maybe the rest of the characters, including the dog, feel a little bit proppy in his life, because that's sort of how his life is. Like nothing is that intentional, and you're sort of getting like a Truman Show like view into this person's life, and all these things are happening. And so, you're not seeing, a stated relationship development between the dog and Owen Wilson's character. It's sort of more from, a bit of a bird's eye view. And I don't know, I felt it from the get-go. And it's sort of making the point that this relationship is actually not a lovey-dovey one. And I get it, like it's, get a better trainer and train the dog. But if you put a pin on that for a little bit, like it's not a lovey-dovey relationship that you would normally have between a dog parent and their dog. It's actually a happenstance that these people are even together. So the relationship and the love is almost like a byproduct of everything that you witnessed. And that's sort of how the movie's designed as well. It'll be super fake and I think inauthentic if we suddenly had relationship moments between these people, because that's not who this character is. This character is just a bystander in his own life,
which is sad. Yeah.
Which is sad, but there are people like that. So to me, the love is sort of like a derived takeaway and not, the prime center of the life of the character and the movie, which I think is an interesting take, because there are many movies, as we listed in our list, where you see that arc, like Charles Grodin's character, for example, is like the opposite of what we are seeing here in a way. But I think it's an interesting take, which I think it's more, to me, the relationship is more of, like I said, a byproduct and more palpable as a viewer, as opposed to from the point of view of the characters themselves, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, maybe too, like as there's a scene in the film where you like, Owen Wilson turns 40 and it's like, what am I doing with my life? And like, like we're older now, like we're middle age. And maybe like I was just keen too much on his arc and just being like, wow, like, the end of the movie, the dog passed away is sad, but just looking at this guy's life, I'm like, this is really sad. And like, you have a sad life that you gotta, it's like if in the Truman Show, if Truman never decided to get on that boat and go out at the end, he just sort of accepted his own fate and just kind of like, and that to me is just very, so like there's a somber sadness over it. And look, Wilson also was just, this was the first movie he made after his suicide attempt. And I wonder if just that was maybe coming across in his performance in some way too, of just, because that's a very hard thing, obviously. And I'm sure he had to deal with, maybe he was bringing a lot of that to this role. And that was the sadness that then I was getting from it. But that in a way, like that was more sad. Like his life story was sadder to me than like the dog passing away at the end. Though again, I did tear up with the dog passing away at the end. Absolutely. As manipulative as that scene is, like you can't not cry when a dog has died on screen. Like,
totally. But see, that's the thing, right? Like in a subtle way, the dog and the trials and tribulations that come with the dog propel this character's life, Owen Wilson's life. Like if you remove the dog out of this person's life and Jen Aniston, I think this person is ending up as a homeless person, probably.
I think I think he'd be better. Like, not to make the movie about, honestly, like I'm like Jennifer Aniston, like, like this is not how you should be living your life. And like to put this guy through this, I think they should have broken up is what I'm saying. And he should have had a, just, I don't know. Now we're getting too much into this is about dogs. I don't want to like, this is not the love episode or the relationship episode. I just thought I was not expecting like that, I guess, kind of take on this movie. I just had it on face. Okay, I know what this is going to be. It's like the dog growing up and affecting people in different ways and all the things, how dogs change you. And I'm like, this guy didn't change at all. And the dog just sort of seemed to be like another prop. Like you said, even Jennifer Aniston, his kids, they all sort of seem like props in this guy's life who just isn't, I don't know, having control of his own. It's, yeah. But again, maybe just my age and I'm keying too much in on that. So, but I'm glad I did see this. And yes, I did cry when the dog died.
Yeah, just a different kind of storytelling. Alex, not all movies can have arcs and not all characters have to be likable.
Oh, true. It's not that it wasn't likable. I just felt bad for him. I'm like, you need something in your life. And like the dog just didn't, help you see that, I guess. But
in indirect ways.
Right.
I think the dog propels. And I think, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so now we'll get to my my number one movie that affected my love of dogs. Classic Old Yeller, 1957 release, directed by Robert Stevenson, starring Dorothy McGuire, Fess Parker, Tommy Kirk, and Old Yeller, who's the dog in the film, was played by Spike. The plot summary is a teenage boy grows to love a stray yellow dog while helping his mother and younger brother run their Texas homestead while their father's away on a cattle drive. First thought to be a good-for-nothing mutt, Old Yeller is soon beloved by all. So this movie is a classic Disney film. Well, there's a lot of Disney movies on our list, actually, combined, that I just realized as I said that. Classic Disney film from the late 50s. And, it's a movie that I'd seen as a kid a couple times. It wasn't like on heavy rotation, but it definitely left a lasting impression on me. Definitely before I had a dog, I saw this film. What I think what this does so well is really show how, much like you were saying with Marley and Me, how is in this entire dog's life. In this movie, it is not the entire life, but it does contain, a dog coming into a family, affecting the family, and dying at the end. And I think that is really what, as a kid, you really see owning a pet, having a pet, being around a dog. It's teaching you those life lessons of growing up, and teaching you about how to love, teaching you about how to care for things, both the animal, but then also other humans, but also teaches you about loss. And I think what this movie does through the main character of this kid is he becomes an adult through this film, through the interactions he's having with Old Yeller and the other people that he's meeting. So it definitely was a movie, as I see this as a kid, I was like, I really want a dog. Like, it's just something that feels like an important part of like life and going through life, is having a pet, and especially a dog. So in this film, the family living out on a farm, and the dad has to leave. I can't remember, it was like some cattle drive, or have to go into town for a couple weeks. And it's just left now with the wife and then the couple kids. And there's sort of a kid who's maybe like 12, 13, who now then has to step into that father role. He has to be the protector. He has to leave the farm. He's like the man on the farm. And in the beginning, he sees the dog as a pest, who, much like Beethoven, the dog just sort of shows up in their life, which is interesting. I think that's something that is in a lot of these movies, actually, where the dogs just kind of appear. And maybe that's just because you were saying you and your sister had dreamed of that. I think as kids, you dream like, what if a dog just showed up? Like, this is so cool. And this movie is just another example of that, where Old Yeller just kind of comes in and teaches this kid, again, a lot of those lessons that I mentioned around how to provide. Like, the dog is working on the farm. He then has to work on the farm. You even find out at one point that the dog has an owner, and the owner comes and is like, hey, look, I want my dog back. Through that conversation with this guy, who, once he realizes the kids love the dog, he's like, obviously I'm not going to take the dog, but here's a chance for a life lesson. And he trades, a hot meal in the farmhouse for the dog. So the kid's actually learning about, the value of money. It's like a teaching moment for this kid. And I think that's really what this movie does so well, and shows that. At the end of the movie, which is also a famous dog dying at the end of the movie, the dog gets bitten and is rabid, and the dog has to put down, and the dad is still gone. So, the mom said, okay, I'll do it. I'll kill the dog. But the kid's like, no, I want to do it. And this also is not only sort of he's killing this dog because it's what's best for the dog. The dog's obviously sick. But also it is that he's now the protector. Like, the dog is a threat now to the family unit, and he has to come in and be the man and be the protector, and then actually be the one to kill the dog, which is really sad. I mean, I cried as a kid at that. I cried when I rewatched it now when the dog dies, because it's sad. Like it's not only is the dog passing away, but you see the dog as someone who was a dog who was really nice, and now he's rabid, and it's just a very off-putting thing. And I think that dog death scene too is very important as a kid, just understanding, that will happen. Like people live longer than dogs. Like there will be that part that'll come when the dog has to leave. And there's even a line in the movie that I thought really kind of sums up the that as a life lesson, is like, don't waste the good parts of life by being scared of the bad parts. Like when you get a dog, that the dog will pass away at some point, and that'll be very hard. But the dog brings so much joy and love into your life and teaches you so many things and makes you into a better person. Like that's just part of accepting that that journey, that there will be bad parts. At some point you will have to say goodbye, which is hard to think about, but that's there, but it's not like you'd rather not the dog be in your life at all. Like you're just thankful for that dog being there because you know about those good parts. So hadn't seen this movie in a really long time. It wasn't like a Beethoven 101 Dalmatians where I was like remembering scenes. It was almost kind of like watching it for the first time. I remember the emotions that I felt and some of the plot points, but it was interesting watching this film again as an adult. Still definitely affected me. Cried when Old Yeller gets killed. But I was able to pick up on a lot of these themes of like masculinity and man being a man. It's also a Western. So there's a lot of like, themes about American mythology and the yeoman farmer and all these things. So I picked up a lot of that stuff watching it again. And the animal acting is crazy. Like unlike White Fang, they don't have no animals were harmed. And there are some incredibly like questionable scenes of the dogs fighting other animals. And I'm like, what is like, hopefully this is fine. That, definitely as a kid, I didn't think about, but yeah, classic. I know it's kind of cheesy even putting this on the list just because of, how this movie is in the culture, but it did really affect me as a child when I watched it, and rewatching it. All those lessons, I think, are the key lessons of, dog ownership that I felt now having a dog. So yeah, Old Yeller, a cheesy choice, but I put it on there nonetheless.
Yeah, not more cheesy than Marley and Me, for sure.
I don't know. They're both of those movies. I think that's like the modern Marley and Me is sort of like the modern Old Yeller. Like everyone's seen it and thinks that's like the dog movie of like the modern audience, and maybe replacing Old Yeller in a way, because it does have that arc of there's a sad scene where you have to say goodbye to the dog. So yeah, Marley and Me is kind of like the modern Old Yeller, perhaps. Anyway.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah. But I think I see now why you felt the way you felt about Marley and Me, because I never watched Old Yeller, and I just watched it for the first time in preparation for this.
Interesting. Okay.
It is sort of, if I were to tell the Marley and Me story in a more conventional way and what I would expect the story arc to be, it would be a Old Yeller kind of movie. Mm-hmm. So I see that. I think it's that traditional structure of the movie is done very well by this movie, and that's sort of what it's going for, as opposed to, I think, Marley and Me. I don't want to give this much credit to the director and the makers of Marley and Me. I don't know if they were intentionally trying to kind of subvert that. Who knows?
Right. Yeah.
Maybe they were making an Old Yeller movie and just failed at it terribly, or they just intentionally did something different, and to me it lands a little bit differently and still in a positive way. But yeah, it was fun to watch Old Yeller. All those themes, like you said, of masculinity and the Western and mythology and such, like that was pretty powerful to see. Again, shot very beautifully. Performances are very good by all the children and such. The boy killing the dog, like I couldn't watch that. That was too much for me. I guess you can sort of say it's a different time and what have you, but I just kept thinking, like, in no way would any parent let a child do that, no matter what lesson you're trying to learn or grow up and what have you. But again, slightly different time, man of the house, even though you're much younger than the mother, but the mother has a certain status in the household.
That's correct. Yeah.
So I don't know. If I had watched this as a kid, it would have stayed with me in a different way. But watching it now for the first time, that was very hard for me to swallow.
Yeah.
Even though I know it's representing a different time.
So you did you know about this? Was this a movie you knew about growing up, or did it not ever kind of make it? So, okay, interesting. So did you know about the ending? Just in pop culture? Oh, okay. So that never. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's just like a famous sort of like sad moment in a movie when Old Yeller gets killed. Did you know that was coming?
I could sense it.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it sort of became pretty clear that this is like one of those arc movies that the dog is, going to be a part of your life for a while, and at some point the dog has to go.
Yeah, and I guess they do drop a lot of hints about the rabies throughout the film too, about like being there. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Like again, as a kid, it just sort of that stuff washes over you so much, and now I can sort of see the seeds of the plot. That's I mean, I guess that scene still, as an adult, for the first time seeing it, seems like it left such an impression you couldn't watch get to it.
Yeah, it was horrifying.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is that one of the few dog movies that I've seen, this is just maybe my own personal preference, but the dog is not movie cute.
Right.
And they say that up front in the movie that, a lot of people call the dog ugly or what have you. And I was sort of happy to see that this dog is kind of a weird looking dog with like weird ears, and you fall in love with the dog through the dog's actions and what the dog means to the family and the relationship that the dog builds with the family, not just purely on the way the dog looks. And I will agree, like, I think half of Marley and Me's winning over, at least on me, from when I first saw it, was because Marley is so cute. Like,
right.
You ignore so much of, the holes everywhere else because the dog is so adorable. So I thought that was interesting. Like, they could have cast like a, movie pretty dog, but they didn't, which is good.
I never thought about that. It's not a Benji of like this cute little dog. But thinking actually back then, I'm not an expert on dog movie history, but I do wonder if, like, because Rin Tin Tin was popular back then, he was not like just a grown-up German Shepherd. Like maybe that thing at some point there was a turning point of like, oh, we got to go like super cute with all the dogs, and then every dog movie it's like the dog's got to be cute and adorable, and that's what sort of sells it. But you're right, like Old Yeller is just, I can't remember what dog breed he is. He was a breed I looked it up after I saw the filming, and I'm like, I've never even heard of this breed of dog, but it definitely does match sort of the Old West. Like if all of a sudden Benji walked up and it's like, okay, this is very unrealistic. So yeah, there is definitely that sense. But cool. So any movies that didn't make it on your list, but that you want to mention?
Nothing in particular. I think I was pretty solid on this right from the get-go, because there are other dog movies that I've watched, but I haven't watched them as often. Best in Show was probably the only other one that I was thinking of. But like you said, like to me, that movie is more about the owners and not the dogs. So that's why I didn't want to put that on my list. But I was happy to see it on your list. But yeah, nothing else. What about you?
Yeah, for me, Beethoven was a similar thing of like, oh, well, that's like the first dog. When I think of a dog movie, that's usually the first one that I think of because I watched it apparently so many times I remember the lines 30 years later. And when I saw it on your list, I'm like, okay, cool. We're talking about Beethoven. Like, we're good. Homeward Bound is another movie that came out around that same time. Also that I watched a lot. It was a remake of another Disney film from I think it was the 60s or the 70s about like two dogs and a cat trying to get back to their owner. So that was a movie I watched a lot as a kid, which actually, other than 101 Dalmatians, the other movies that we chose, the dogs don't talk, which is interesting because there's a lot of talking dog movies. And for some reason, those I guess didn't resonate as much with us, other than 101 Dalmatians, than the ones that don't talk. Because Homeward Bound, they talk. Beethoven, the dog doesn't talk. So it just, I don't know. I don't know what that means, but it just all of a sudden that connection dawned on me of like, yeah, I guess it's more the realism or the fact that, I don't know, like the talking dog sort of puts human personalities onto an animal. I mean, dogs are alive. I think they have if there is a soul, like, and we have it, they have it too, but we're different also animals. And, maybe the voice on a dog just seems too much like turning them into humans. I don't know. Like,
I think so. It could work in animation form, but I don't know. In real live action, it feels a little put upon to me. One of the movies that I want to see that I always avoided is Hachi, which I've heard really good things about. But gosh, what's his name?
I've never seen that either, but I have heard good things about it.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll both have to watch that and then do an episode on that.
All right.
Yeah, that movie actually was coming up a lot. Just and looking on IMDb, it's just like a really highly rated dog. And it, I watched the trailer and I cried at the trailer. So I think
avoided it.
I think, yeah. I think that movie definitely. At some point, I almost thought about watching it, and then for this episode, though, I mean, just another thing to kind of compare the other movies that did have an effect on me. But yeah, that one definitely. It seems to be some modern classic that at some point I will watch. But
yeah,
cool. Yeah. So any parting thoughts that you have? Messages, dog messages?
Well, just that dogs are amazing. They are the best things on the planet or any planet. So for all those people who have dogs, like, love your dogs, take care of them, also train them well. Annoying and a handful, most likely it's you, not the dog.
Right.
So take care of them, and much love to Oscar.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I second everything you said. Dogs are the best. So a shout out to all the dog owners, past dog owners, potential future dog owners, and all the dogs out there. Hopefully the dogs enjoyed this episode too. Great. So thank you everyone for listening. Please do rate, subscribe, leave us reviews on your favorite podcast platform. Spread the word. You have any dog lovers out there, please share this episode. And we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening.
Woof, woof.
Woof, woof. Bye.